Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Beatrix Snyman from Beatrix Designs. Here you will learn how to master Tunisian crochet and much more. If you don't want to miss anything, remember to subscribe and hit the bell, or you can visit my website at www.beatrixdesigns.co.za. Enjoy! Here is a sample of my Tunisian Extended Stitch, which is a very popular stitch for the longer stitches in Tunisian crochet. It creates a fabric that eliminates the curl almost completely, and it gives also excellent drape, and it stretches more than the basic stitches. Now it is formed by just adding an extra chain on the stitch after you pulled up the loops and collect them on your hook. So that's basically all that happens. And by doing this, it creates that extra length that the Tunisian Extended Stitch gives. Now you can basically work any stitch as an extended stitch. Your simple stitch, a knit stitch, your reverse stitch even. The only thing that you'll do is just add an extra chain after you pulled the loop from the fabric. Now, due to the lack of curl on this stitch, when you create a piece using the Tunisian Extended Stitch, you can work a row of Tunisian Extended Stitch on your foundation before you work your simple stitch or your reverse stitch or even the knit stitch or whatever basic stitch you are working. You can just add that as a foundation row, and that will help with the curl on your fabric. Now let's have a look on how to create the stitch with a few variations. Now the foundation chain of the Tunisian Extended Stitch, you will work the amount of stitches that you will want for your piece or the project that you make. And in this case, just for the sake of making this tutorial on the example, I worked already 10 chains, but now it is an extended stitch, it's a longer stitch, so I will have to add one extra chain to give length to or to bring up the height of my first loop to the height of the extended stitch. And as I will work in the back bars, you generally skip the first bar, work in the second, but now I made an extra chain, so you will start working in the third bar of your foundation chain. And the only thing that you will do is pull up a loop, yarn over, and you will chain that loop. And there's my next back bar on the foundation chain. Yarn over, pull up a loop, and just make another chain. And I will continue like that. There you go. I will continue like that to the end of my foundation chain. There you go. And chain. Pull up a loop and chain. Pull up a loop and chain. And the last one. You can watch my first lesson on the foundation chain to see how I work that first chain of my foundation chain. It is the slip knot which I do not close, and I do it on purpose, and you can just have a look at that video to see what my Reasons for that is will give you a lot of tips around your foundation chain. Now, there's my foundation row on the Tunisian Extended Stitch. Now, to do the return pass, I will do it as normal by chain my first stitch, yarn over and just pull through 2 loops all the way up to the end of the return pass. There you go. There you go. There's the foundation. From here you can decide in which way you want to work your extended stitches. Now, it will all depend on where you will do the placement of your hook. Now you can either insert your hook underneath the front V-bar, like in the case when you work Tunisian Simple Stitch. You can place it between the 2 V-bars, like working a knit stitch. You can even insert the hook in the back bump or the back V-bar, sorry, the back V-bar, like when you work your reverse stitch. Or you can work in that bump, that back bump of the chains. And that is just different ways of working your extended stitch. Now, when I write this in a pattern format, I will always indicate how I'm working my extended stitch. For example, if I work it Tunisian Simple Stitch-wise, like this, there you go, there I make my chain of the loop that I pulled up, I will say, I will work my Tunisian Extended Stitch, Tunisian Simple Stitch-wise. I prefer that terminology just to make it more easier understandable. So here I will work a pattern in Tunisian Extended Stitch, but Tunisian Simple Stitch wise, because of the placement of my hook when I pull up my loop. So I work it like a simple stitch, pull up the loop, but that loop I just give it a chain on the top, and there you can see how it extends this stitch. To work the last stitch, now this can be a bit confusing. Be careful as you have 2 chains at the end here, because you have the chain to make the extended stitch and you have the chain to close that last stitch. Be careful not to get confused with your horizontal chains as well, because the first horizontal chain that interlock this very next stitch on your return pass might slant a bit downward, so it can look as if it's part of your very last stitch on your work. So in general, be careful for that stitch. So in this case, you can see there's a chain. That was the one that created the extended stitch, and there is my chain that closed that stitch, and that is where I will insert my hook behind the V-bar, front V-bar, and that back bump, and I will just pull up a loop and chain. And there's my first row's forward pass complete. With a return pass, just make a chain to close that first stitch, yarn over and pull through 2 loops, and you close your first row of Tunisian Extended Stitches worked Tunisian Simple Stitch wise, because of where I did the hook placement. Now you can choose whichever way you want to place your hook when you work your extended stitch. You can see working in Tunisian Simple Stitch wise, it opens up that loop quite a bit. Now if you want it more closed, I will suggest that you work the knit stitch wise. And again, I want to show you something that I did not do in this first row, but can you see how my first stitch here is only the loop and how it is pulling? It does not actually complement the rest of my stitches. So this is something else that you need to keep in mind. Just as your last stitch, your first loop on your hook, you have to chain that one. Do not forget about it. Otherwise, it will give this appearance on the beginning of this first row that I made. And you can clearly see it does not look correct. And it will pull down on the side of your piece if you do not add that chain. It will be too short. That loop is totally too short for the rest of these stitches. Now let's work Tunisian knitwise by placing our hook between those two V-bars. Pull up a loop, working a knit stitch, but just add your chain. The next one between the V-bars, add the chain. And this is now the Tunisian Extended Stitch worked Tunisian knit stitch wise, because that is the method that you use for the placement of your hook, as if you work the knit stitch, but because you add that one extra chain, it is an extended stitch. Let's get to the last stitch again. Identify the chain for the extended stitch and then the chain that closed that last stitch, and that is where I will insert my hook to pull up my last stitch. And there is the row completed. Close the first one, yarn over, pull through 2 loops to complete this row, making the return pass. There you go. There you go. Just need to get some more fabric yarn here. Look at the difference of the beginning of this row, the beginning of the first row, where I did not make an extended stitch. I did not make my chain on that first loop that's always on your hook. You can also see this section is more of open work. That one makes a more clear line, horizontal line on your chains of your return pass. Tunisian Simple Stitch wise, Tunisian knit wise. Now let's try another variation. Let's work the next row into the back bars. Now remember, chain that very first loop on the hook, and then we will insert the hook into the back bars and chain, into the back bar and chain, into the back bar and chain, and we will complete this row up to the end, to the back bar. Can you really see what's happening here? Gives a different appearance than the previous two already. There you go. Am I almost at the last? There is my last back bar and chain. And this is always easy because you can identify the back bar easier working on the last stitch than try to find that last stitch with a V-bar and the back bump. So I really like working in the back bars just for the purpose of that last stitch. But yes, now to do the return, you make another chain to close that first stitch and return as normal. And then we can have a look at the 3 different rows and the placement of the hook, how they compare. Just look at that now. Can you see what that looks in comparing to inserting Tunisian knit-wise, Tunisian Simple Stitch-wise? This was now Tunisian back bar-wise. And we can try another variation. Chain your first stitch. And let's find that back bar as if we're going to work reverse stitch. Remember the reverse stitch? If you're not familiar with the reverse stitch, I do have a lesson on working the reverse stitch. Let's just work in those back bar, vertical bars. And after you pull up a loop, you'll just chain it. Pull up a loop and chain it. Pull up a loop and chain. And chain. Pull up a loop and chain. And pull up a loop and chain. And for this purpose, I will just work in the back bar of my last stitch as well. You can identify there at the back. And chain. Alright, let's return. Chain the first one and then yarn over, pull through 2. Just like we are so used to now. And the rhythm, I know many of you, I'm one of them. I just love the rhythm of the return pass. That is why I really love Tunisian crochet. Now I don't know if my tension got a little bit more tight, but excuse the slant on this sample for now. It might also be because of the back bar that I worked in. That might tend to give a little bit of a pull into the fabric. You can see that when you make samples. But there you go. Now you can compare. Here you can see that is the reverse stitch texture that it created when I worked in the back bar, back vertical bar. And then it also pulls a bit on that back vertical bar. And there is my chain that I made. And this also gives a total different appearance. Now, you can go and play around and see which variation you like most. And play around with the texture that it creates. It's lovely. The last one I like because it gives the reverse stitch look plus the open look of the lacy effect that the extended stitch do give. Now, the Tunisian extended stitch is a very nice stitch to work in conjunction with lacy patterns. If you make clusters and make lace patterns, I really like to use them together, but you must also be careful on the tension of the different stitches that you use together when you like to play with different stitch types. Now, for closing or binding off the Tunisian extended stitch, I will do the same technique that I do with any stitch. I will use the placement of the hook that I used to create the extended stitch. For example, the first part where I used the simple stitch, I will just insert my hook underneath the front V-bar and I will close it with a slip stitch, and that will complete my piece. There you go. Let's work a few stitches and you can see what happens. And this is the Tunisian Extended Stitch. Hope you enjoyed this lesson.
Hope you enjoyed this video. If you found anything valuable, please share this with your crochet friends. Also, you can leave a comment if there's anything that you would like to see in the future. And remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.